It only took about 2 years, but I finally found enough of my tools that I can actually start doing some model train repair. My biggest problem is my old engine cradle is just disintegrated. Originally, I had a piece of 1-inch thick foam, and I cut 2 strips and hot glued them on top to make an engine cradle, but it's just not going to work anymore. So I found a piece of foam from a couch cushion. It's about the right thickness. I cut a piece to length, and then I cut a channel down the center of it. I used a piece of 2x4 as a cutting guide. That's just about the perfect width for HO trains. It's not pretty, but it's functional. I've got a couple of bicentennial locomotives here. I'm going to try to get the steam locomotive running first. It's a Tyco 10-wheeler. I think they used to call it the Belle of the 80s. I have to dig up an old Tyco catalog. The Tyco catalog for 1972 and 73 season shows 2 train sets with the old-time 10-wheeler in it. The top one is the Golden West, which has the wood-burning 460, and the next set down is called the Dixie Belle. It has a coal-burning 460, and they're also listed as being separately available. The other engine is a lifelike F7 from the early years, and we can look at that more in another episode. I'd like to get both of these engines running because the country's 250th birthday is coming up in 2026. It'd be nice to have the bicentennial engines on the railroad. Generally speaking, it looks complete, but it has a couple of problems and it doesn't want to run. Let's see if we can figure out why. All of the wheels and axles seem to be okay. This engine picks up power from the tender wheels on this side and the driving wheels on this side. There's a wire that runs between the tender and the engine. Looks like it's intact. And there's a nice fiber tie bar, drawbar between the locomotive and tender. A lot of times these are broken. This one looks good. But I do see a problem right here that will keep the engine from running. The traction tire on the rear driving wheel is off and it's jammed in the side rod here. So let's see if we can fix that. I don't know how well the camera is going to pick this up, but if you look right here, you can see the traction tire is off. It's laying on the face of the driver and it's jammed under the side rod. So I'm going to put that back in place off camera and then we'll see if we can get it to run. I was able to finesse the traction tire back into its groove without removing the side rod or removing the body. So let me get a transformer and we'll put some power on it and see if it runs. If I connect power, you can see that it doesn't work. But if I move the clip from the front tender truck to the rear tender truck, I can hear it buzzing a little. And you can hear the motor bearings squealing, so we'll have to lubricate that before we run it. So basically we've got a bad electrical connection from the front truck to the tender frame, and we've got dry motor bearings. First thing I do is I'm going to remove the 2 screws attaching the drawbar between the engine and tender. And now I can deal with the engine and tender as 2 separate assemblies. I'm going to remove this screw right here, which will remove the lead truck and should separate the front of the boiler from the frame. And lift off the lead truck and the screw. It's also a spring inside and a little brass tube, spacer tube of some kind. And once that screws out, it looks like the frame and running gear just lift off the boiler. Might take a little finesse off camera. There's a back head to the boiler that covers the motor that slips out the back, and then the boiler should come off. It takes some finagling. You gotta slide it down and push it forward a little bit and work the back end out, and then slide it back, and then it comes off. You gotta work that wire through, and you have to be careful because the headlight wire is still attached. The headlight wire coming out of the boiler goes to this screw, which is also where the wire comes from, the tender. I'm not going to take that apart because all I'm going to do is lubricate the engine. Oh, it's got a nice strong magnet on it. That's a good sign. So the goal is to get a drop of oil here on this front motor bearing, and another drop of oil here on this rear motor bearing. These are the armature bearings. It's the only two pieces on the motor that you need to lubricate. You don't want to get any oil on the commutator right here, and this commutator is not that dirty, so I'm not going to clean it. And I'm also going to add a drop of oil to the sliding parts here and the crank pin for the main rod, and where the side rods attach. I'm going to put a drop of oil on each one of those on both sides, and then I'm going to add a little bit of grease here to the gears, the worm and worm gear. I'm using Labelle number 108 oil. It's got a hypodermic needle applicator, just one drop on each of the moving parts, and then right in here on the motor bearing in the front, and on the motor bearing in the back. Don't need to get any on the windings if you can avoid it, and that should be enough. I'll just do the other side of the running gear, and then we'll power it up and see if the squealy bearings are gone. Alright, let's see if it runs. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of Labelle number 106 gear grease. As soon as I poke a hole big enough for the grease to come out. You can see right here that the worm gear does not have a cover on it. So I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on the worm, let it work its way around. That finishes work on the locomotive. As far as cleaning and lubricating, seems to run fine. I'm going to put it back together off camera. Hopefully I won't break anything while I'm doing it. The engine is back together. A couple of pieces of advice. Number one, make sure you don't get that headlight wire wrapped around the motor brush because you won't be able to get it back together if you do. Number 2, don't forget the little brass collar and spring that goes under the lead truck. Should be spring loaded and move easily. Don't over tighten that screw. Make sure you get this front wire here. It comes down, it goes right behind the back edge of the pilot and up the other side. If you're not careful, it'll flip up and go under the engine back here, under the boiler. And the last thing is, I didn't really pay attention when I took it apart how to run the wire out of the back of the locomotive over to the tender. So right now I have it going under the cover, the back head that covers the motor. I'm not sure that's correct. And the last thing we need to do is remove this front tender truck because there's no electrical contact between the wheels. Wow, that's really stuck. This screw right here is really stuck, so I'm not going to risk breaking off that screw head. Instead, I'm going to try putting a drop of rail zip down here where the contact point is between the truck and the frame, and wiggle that back and forth a few times and see if I can get it to make electrical contact. This stuff's really old. I think now they have rail zip too. I'm just going to put a drop on the end of a screwdriver and tuck it down in that where those two pieces come together. I put a drop of rail zip under the bolster screws here and down where it touches the frame, and then I put a drop where the axle goes into the side frame of the truck on the side with the contact wheels. I'll put regular oil where the axles go into the truck side frames on the non-electrical side. And the very last thing to do is to add a drop of oil to each one of the axles on the locomotive. Do up here. There's a drop. And then we'll go down between the driver and the frame. The engine and tender have been reattached. And it seems to run fine. So let's take it downstairs, put it on the track, see what happens.